Good morning. I just want to welcome everybody to our webinar today, Compliance and Cybersecurity. My name is Rob Schenk. I'm with ITS, Intelligent Technical Solutions. We specialize in helping small and medium-sized businesses thrive by managing and securing their technology. Today, a couple of housekeeping notes before we kind of get started here. The webinar should run about 30 to 35 minutes. We'll stick around and have some questions. We'll be available for some questions at the end. The webinar will be recorded. So if you'd like to review this, the information at later at your convenience, you'll be able to do so. We're happy to take questions during the webinar. We want to make this as collaborative as possible, so please feel free to use the Q&A button and feel free to go ahead and submit your questions as we go here, and we'll take them as we kind of go, and we'll definitely save them for the end as well. All righty, so let's get started here. You'll notice a QR code in the lower right of the screen. This is going to lead to a special offer page for attendees of the live webinar. If you need to leave early, you might just take a kind of photo of that or connect to that with your camera on your phone, and that'll lead to that special offer. For today's discussion, wanted to go ahead and welcome our special guests. We have Sean Harris. He's a Senior VP of Cybersecurity with Intelligent Technical Solutions. Sean's been in the IT business for going over 15 plus years now, and he plays a really critical role in cybersecurity strategy, incident response, and manages our Security Operations Center here at ITS. Matt Lewis, I want to welcome as well. He's Chief Security Officer for Field Effect. Matt's previous experience, he was actually working for the Canadian government for over 20 years at the Communications Security Establishment, which effectively is the Canada's version of the US's NSA. While at these roles, he's had to focus on IT strategy, security operations, data analysis, and incident response. And at Field Effect, as Chief Security Officer, he oversees all aspects of physical and information security, along with the compliance programs over at Field Effect. So I want to welcome you both. All righty, so let's get started here. Maybe we'll just start off with some definitions. Maybe we can define technical compliance. Maybe Matt, if you want to get started here, what is it? Why should we care? What's the importance here?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob. So when we're talking about technical compliance, all we mean is a set of rules. These are norms and standards that people have written down saying, thou shall do this, or thou shall try to do that. Well, when we get down to the heart of it, what we're really talking about are rules that help us protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data that we have on our networks and in the cloud. When confidentiality, we're talking about only the people that need access to it have it, and we secure it from being leaked all across the internet. Integrity means that nobody can alter it if we don't want them to, that people can trust that data. And availability means it's there for us when we need it, and that it's secure from disasters. And if a disaster does happen, we can get it back quickly. So some of these compliance frameworks that we're going to talk about are audited, which means a third party will come in and assess how well you're implementing those rules. Some of them aren't, and it's often challenging. Let's not kid ourselves. Technical compliance, it's not for the faint of heart.
Sean, anything you'd like to add?
I like how Matt laid it out. It's a good start. Yeah, I would definitely say that compliance can be a bit of a dirty word. Even listen to it, you got to comply to this. Not many people are told they have to comply to things in their day-to-day, comply to washing your hands, comply to washing, but really it's a simplification of a very complex thing, which is protecting your organization and the CIA triad, just like Matt laid out. And so these frameworks and things that we'll talk about in a bit are really making it easier for us to do that. And so otherwise it would be a daunting task that would be unsurmountable.
Yeah, there's a lot of frameworks out there, Matt, so it can get pretty confusing, pretty overwhelming. Can you kind of help sort it out a little bit for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're trying to do on this slide is just to give you an idea of the breadth of different compliance frameworks that are out there. So we got PCI DSS. That's for credit card information. It was created by the credit card companies themselves to make sure that that data is protected. We've got CMMC. down in the bottom left corner, that's for the controlled and classified information that is produced by the Defense Department. So if you're in the defense industrial base, you'll know all about CMMC and that's coming down the line. Then we've got two frameworks right there that are put out by the federal government in the United States, and they're legislated. So HIPAA, if you have patient health information, you need to comply by HIPAA. And if you're a financial institution, there's a good chance that you have to comply by the FTC safeguards rules. And that applies not only to banks, that can apply to people that are providing financial advice, small mortgage lenders. A lot of people fall under those FTC safeguards.
Yeah, including, I'd say, like even the FTC safeguards, also like auto dealerships. I know there's been a big incident with CDK recently that they just had a large breach where that's a line of business application that many auto dealers use, and this all falls under the FTC safeguards rule.
Absolutely. Auto dealerships are in there because they're processing those loans and that they have a massive amount of data about their customers. The next two we have are ISO 27001, which is near and dear to my heart, and also SOC 2. These are two frameworks. They're good examples of ones that are done voluntarily. There's not a government out there that says you must be SOC 2 or you must be ISO 27001. Companies do this voluntarily to show their customers and other organizations that they can be trusted. And the last one was the CIS controls. This is a great example of a free compliance framework that companies of all sizes can implement to increase their security of their data. And it's not audited, so it's a good low-cost way for small and medium-sized enterprises to get into the compliance game.
Sean, anything you like that?
Yeah, I love the mention of the CIS controls. For years, we were using NIST, like cybersecurity framework or 800.5.3 with clients that didn't have anything else that they needed to do. Now CIS controls is a really good decision because it's very prescriptive. It tells you exactly what to do. They even create the images for your computers, everything you can grab from there. It is a nonprofit, so there is a lot available, and you can even crosswalk their frameworks against other frameworks, which just means you can say, hey, if I do CIS controls, how much have I already completed of this other framework that I might be interested in doing, if that is HIPAA or the SOC 2. And I love how you laid out that the SOC 2 and the ISO 27001 are ones that we want to do. It's funny because clients come to us and they don't necessarily want to do it, but they're not being compelled by legislation, right? I think is what you're saying. But a lot of times there's a big partner that's dangling a lot of money, and they'll say, unless you get this, we really can't be sure that we don't have the assurances that we need to know that you're handling the data that we're going to pass to you the same way that we do. And so it's been for many of our clients, it's been something that definitely opens up a pathway to more business and greater amount of business.
So let me just take a little step back here. So from a larger view here, you have regulatory requirements if you're in specific industries, right? There might be some framework that you have to follow as consequence of being in that particular industry. If you're not in any of these prescriptive regulated industries, then you would be following potentially CIS controls or NIST. Those are more kind of overarching across industries. Is that a way to think about it?
I would say that it really depends. So oftentimes when I'm talking to a prospective client or one of our existing clients that are looking at doing these, we really want to look at what might be the most bang for your buck. So if you're in the health industry, HIPAA, of course, is something that you should be looking at. If you're dealing with credit cards, PCI, you're going to have to do regardless. But yeah, I mean, it might be that you might want to do SOC 2. So you're going to go that route. But absent of any of that, definitely CIS controls is a way to go. And I think like Matt's up in Canada, so I think ISO is a little more likely than NIST up there that they're going to pick. And I also think SOC 2 is less likely than ISO 2. So it really depends on what's compelling you to do it, and then what is that going to look like to your clients and your customers and your partners that you deal with. Like, is that going to give them the assurances that they need? And is that going to give you the assurances that you need that your company is meeting all those requirements and that you're not going to have some kind of major event or breach, which we'll talk more about.
So moving on here. We've gone through all these various kind of frameworks that you mentioned, Matt. So as a small business owner, executive business leader, what are the benefits of compliance? Why should I be doing this? What is the point? What's the purpose?
Absolutely. Those are great questions because a lot of people are like, what's in it for me? I think when people implement technical compliance, they're going to see long-term that it doesn't take time, that it makes time, that their entire business is more regimented. They get better night's sleep because they know that they're protected against these types of threats. So it's going to provide you a structure that you can follow, everything from how you assign access on your network, how you onboard employees, how you securely offboard employees. There's so many advantages to going down the technical compliance route, but overall, they're going to find that their business is much more regimented. The next one is it's going to help them qualify for cyber insurance. A lot of insurance companies now, they want to see evidence, if not of a compliance framework itself, of evidence of some of these sub-controls that you're thinking about risk, that you've implemented policies and procedures. Insurance companies want to see this, especially to get the best rate. The next two bullets, they kind of dovetail with what Sean was saying on the last slide. It's about increasing market opportunities, right? Sometimes that's not going to even be where your company resides, but where your customers reside. If I'm trying to attract customers in the United States, I probably want a SOC 2 Type 2 report. If I'm going for more of an international customer base, ISO 27001 might be the right choice for me because it's much more known internationally. The last one was limiting legal liability. Recently, the state of Ohio passed a law saying that small and medium-sized enterprises, everyone could be legally liable if data that they hold for their customers is leaked, unless they had a compliance framework implemented. So business owners are now turning towards technical compliance to limit their legal liability, to show that, hacks do happen. We can't prevent them all, but they're using this to show that I did everything under my power to limit this.
Sean?
Yeah, I think that increased market opportunity, if I could add a little bit to that, one that we're seeing a lot of is with in relation to CMMC, which I know was mentioned a slide back. I'm a CMMC certified professional, which is called a CCP, and there aren't many of us yet. So there's a lot of knowledge that isn't out there. There's a lot of misunderstanding. And what's happening is the contractors being told that they have to meet this standard by a certain date, but then the date keeps moving. There's no actual final rule. So there's a lot of misunderstanding, but they do know, and it's across the board. Everybody understands that this will go into effect at a point, and those contractors will not be able to work with the Department of Defense dealing with certain types of data if they don't have these certifications in place. And so it really is changing the marketplace. So there are some people that are doing it defensively, but there's actually quite a few of our clients that are looking at it as a way to win contracts that maybe were harder to get into now, because there will be quite a few organizations that decide it's not a big enough percentage of their business for them to justify doing it. And so that's one that we've seen a lot of for increasing market opportunities. And we do believe, and it's said that once the Department of Defense really figures out that CMMC structure, the rest of the government agencies are going to copy or create something very similar. And so we do see that happening down the line too. So there'll be more of that. I think really the interesting thing about compliance is that it's kind of the tail or the end of a process that makes sure your business continues to exist. And so even besides all these great things here, increased marketing, qualify for insurance, the structure I think talks to it most is that, really a business owner should be annually, or organization leaders should be annually looking at what could cause our organization to not be here next year. And so they're looking at all the possible risks that are out there, and then they're applying the impact and the likelihood of those risks happening. From there, they then put in controls, and that might be cybersecurity insurance. If something happens to this building, we won't be able to continue as a business, but if we buy this insurance, then we'll be able to continue. Well, if you put in those controls, you then have to monitor those controls, and that's where compliance comes in, to make sure that the controls that are prescripted through the framework are in fact monitored. But sometimes we lose the fact that the biggest benefit is what was first said by Matt, is that structure for your business, the maturity that a business needs in order to scale properly, but also to be able to sleep at night, that you're not going to wake up tomorrow and something happens that has maybe a decent likelihood and you haven't thought of it and you haven't dealt with how to deal with it as a team.
Yeah, good points. Now, okay, let's say I've made the decision. I need to go ahead and begin the journey with compliance, but it becomes like also a pretty daunting and potentially kind of scary endeavor. It's kind of seems overwhelming. Can you kind of deconstruct this a little bit for us, Matt?
Yeah, I
What could-
think the reason why it's so scary is it's pretty simple, actually. Often it's a big lift. What I mean by that is that there's a big discrepancy between initially what an organization is doing and where they need to get to satisfy that entire compliance framework. So it can be a little daunting when you first look at that delta, but that's why getting the right team behind you and understanding that it is achievable is so important. The next one is financial implications. Because there often is that delta, it is usually it's going to take at least a little bit of financial resources, whether or not it's people or technology, to satisfy the requirements in that framework. Then we get into why it's scary, specifically for frameworks where there's that third-party auditing. When a third-party auditor is coming in, that adds a whole new layer of fear, because when you read the text of these frameworks, they're often subjective. It means most of them, especially ones like ISO and CMMC, they don't tell you exactly what to do, but they do give you generalized statements of what they want to see. So every auditor coming in, although they try to remove the subjectivity, it's inevitable. So there's always that fear that my auditor isn't going to like what I implemented. And there's also just that loss of control. I feel like I'm no longer steering my business, that there's this document that I have to follow. I think it's important to just remember the positives. The positives of technical compliance far outweigh any of these negatives.
John, what's been your experience?
Well, many a company come to us with those compelling reasons, right? CMMC coming down the pipeline, dates getting closer, or partners that said, we'll give you this business, but you have to have this by this date. And it feels like they're always a little behind. And I wish they would come to us earlier, because yeah, you just got to get started. You just got to, any large task, you need to break it down into milestones and get going, work with somebody that can help you with it. I think that's the biggest one. I think the loss of control that you mentioned, Matt, if I could expand on that a bit, I think sometimes I see this with probably smaller organizations where, you know, you have kind of the sole owner or a couple partners, and they think a bunch of people are going to come in and put a bunch of restrictions and guide rails on everything that they do, and it's going to be hard to run their business, and they're not going to have decisions because some auditor comes in. And really what it is it's you taking more control of your organization. If you don't identify a risk and deal with it, you've decided to retain the risk by just de facto. And so I think by getting the information to the owners or the leaders, by going through this process, you can then decide how you want to deal with each of the risks. Now, you have to work in a way that the auditor will pass you if you're in an audited framework, right? But a lot of it is interpreting the control. What is the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish here? And what are the different options that we have? So if you're working with a good consulting company, oftentimes they will provide you with options. And that way you can decide what is the path we want to go. For example, maybe it's too risky to operate in a specific market. And so the way that you go forward is to no longer operate in that market. And prior to that idea, maybe everybody gave you 50 ways to operate in that market that was very expensive. Or another one that we see a lot is data on handheld devices is too expensive. And so now we either have to supply them all with handheld devices, or we have to not use handheld devices at all. So at least you can line up what those options are, make the decision, move forward, and you can still meet that control.
Sounds good. So we've talked about, as we started earlier, we talked about all these different types of frameworks. How does a company actually begin the process of choosing, and how do you determine which ones you need to be working through? And what are some kind of rules of the road here that might help folks out, Matt?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's going to be obvious. So if you're a small medical clinic, you're going to have to abide by HIPAA. If you're a small medical clinic and you also process a lot of financial transactions, credit card payments, you're going to need PCI DSS compliance as well. So sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's going to come down to budget and how much you can put into having a dedicated person or a dedicated GRC team, or maybe an extra IT person who can help with compliance. I think it's always best to consult an expert like Sean if you have any questions about what's the right framework for me. Remember that the first one is the most difficult because a lot of them have shared things that they are universal across all of these. So the first one by far is the most challenging one if you have multiple. And the last thing I'll say is if you absolutely don't need to go down the road of having an audited framework, I would strongly recommend against doing that because auditors, they add cost, they add time. And so unless somebody's specifically asking you for an ISO 27001 cert or a SOC 2 report, I would stay with one of the non-audited free frameworks.
Sean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. First framework, definitely the hardest. First year of the first framework, the hardest. Usually a lot of policy needs to be created, a lot of kind of changing how people do things, calendared events, compliance calendar, like a lot of different things are created in that first year that can be followed in the subsequent years. But when you're signing on to a SOC 2, to what Matt was saying, you're doing it every year, forever. I actually had an individual, and I felt bad because I know we went through everything prior, and we were getting done with the report, and he goes, "Okay, what's next? We're done, right?" And I went, "No, now we do it all over again." So we're back in the cycle of doing it again. Well, how often do we do that? Well, as long as you want to keep the SOC 2 forever is the answer. As long as you need that SOC 2. And so luckily for them, it made a lot of sense to have that. So I think there was a little bit of lapse of our original conversation. But yeah, no, we've had clients that come to us and the external party can actually be fairly vague on what they need in order to hand you that data and that big contract. And they'll give you several options. And that's where you really do want to work with someone that understands those because some of them are a lot harder than others. With that exact example of the SOC 2 client, they were actually looking at high trust first, which is a great framework, also very HIPAA dependent, but it's pretty expensive. It's quite a bit more stringent. And so, we had to work with the external party to say, what is actually required here? How do we meet this need? That's the other piece too. Make sure that whatever you pick, if you go down the route, it in fact meets the need of that external party and get it in writing if you can. If it's legislated, it's a lot easier to know exactly how it will meet it.
Sounds good. So now that we have we have a base understanding of the frameworks, we understand some of the benefits. Are there some kind of technical controls or requirements that maybe apply across all the frameworks that kind of provide that solid foundation from a business to kind of work from, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. When you look through the nitty-gritty of all these different frameworks, you're going to see the word monitoring over and over again. All of these frameworks, they want you to monitor across your IT assets, on the endpoints, on the network, on the cloud, and they want you to not only be monitoring those for hackers, but they want you to be monitoring them for vulnerabilities so that you can address them quickly. So we would be incorrect if we said that there's one magic technology that you can install on your network that'll just satisfy all the technical controls. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. But when you have a managed detection and response service, especially like IPS Secure, the one that you guys provide, you're checking off so many boxes from a technical compliance perspective because you're able to show either through your self-assessment or to that third-party auditor that I'm doing everything. You can scrape by in some situations with just a legacy antivirus like Windows Defender and a next generation firewall, but it's so much easier to show that compliance both to your internal stakeholders and the external ones if you have a little bit more robust monitoring technology.
Sean?
Yeah, I think gosh, I'm thinking of when you said you can scrape by with it gave me the shivers. You definitely can scrape by with a lot of different things. It just results in possible exceptions during the observable period if you're being audited. And there's nothing worse than not knowing if you have what they're going to ask you for. And so I think having the right tools in place do that. I mentioned earlier that the way to do it is a risk assessment followed by a gap assessment against those risks. How are we dealing with them? Finding controls, and then what do you do with the controls, and then monitoring those controls to see if they're in compliance. And so that's the path there. However, we have plenty of clients that don't need compliance, or they're not to that level yet. And so that's why our secure advanced package is there. I mean, it would be used with those that need compliance also, but we already know that the stuff that's in that package meets and checks off a baseline of what everybody should have. And so I think that's something to keep in mind, but it really just, you do need to, you put in the control, you need to make sure the control is working, and you need to make sure it's working in a consistent manner. And that's so that if it's not working, you put in something else, you do something else, because you're supposed to be constantly learning as an organization, and compliance is a circle. It's not a straight line. As soon as you're done, it starts over again, and you reassess all the risks, and you start over again. You reassess yourself against the framework, and oftentimes new frameworks are published. The bodies that publish the frameworks now have a new one. So the monitoring is a critical portion of this.
And what about logging, Matt?
The logging is a fun one. It's another one that's near universal. You're going to see requirements for logging in nearly every single. I haven't seen one where there isn't logging requirements. And the reason is because you need that audit trail. You need to be able to look back and see what occurred on this system or this device months or potentially years. So what the auditors will be looking for, what the frameworks are looking for, is not only that you have logging enabled, but that it's feeding anomaly detection, that the logs are going through some sort of security process, and they can spot things that a security analyst should look at. So that's one. The other thing is that they'll be looking for is access controls. If I'm putting all of my logs onto a server that everyone has access to, and they can alter them or delete them, that's not good from a compliance perspective. We need to be able to show that they're going someplace where even the editing of those logs is logged, and that they are locked down so that nobody can alter it. Because what's the first thing a hacker is going to try to do? They're going to try to remove evidence in the logs or on the computer that they were even there.
Sure. Yeah.
The last one is retention. So that means securely keeping those logs for a specified period of time. For some organizations, retention is not going to be that big of a deal. They can get away with maybe as low as 60 or 90 days retention on those logs. But for other people, specifically for frameworks like HIPAA, they have an extended log retention up to 6 years.
Sean, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, log retention and using something like a SIEM to pull everything into a place was previously a thing that most of our smaller clients would never be able to afford. And the organizations or the companies that offered it, it was very expensive. And so to be able to have tools now that can aggregate those logs for us and look at anomalies all together is fantastic. Because even when the other clients got those big SIEMs like Splunk or some of those other ones out there, then what do you do with all the data? How do you process that data? So then it became alert fatigue, where nobody paid attention to anything because there were so many things. And so I think it's fantastic now that that this is not as Herculean a task that it used to be. And it's actually fairly simple, and our secure plan does do this for us. But definitely you want to make sure that your retention meets whatever the requirements are. And then also, is it talking to auditors or knowing someone that's gone through the audit and working with someone who's good, because then understanding, well, what exactly are they going to want from those logs so that we make sure that we have that available. So even if it doesn't say you have to keep the retention for 6 years, well, if you're auditing a 12-month observable period for like SOC 2 type 2, for example, it's a lot easier if you have the logs to pull from, or you better be dumping the logs somewhere so that you can audit them.
And what about moving over into kind of policies and related kind of document creation? What are some
Yeah, so
points there?
policies, again, absolutely universal across frameworks. They need you to have documented policy and procedure documents that describe how you do business. They are a necessary evil. I know a lot of people don't like technical writing. It's something that gets outside of our comfort zone. But the reason we need them is because they provide audit criteria. So if I'm an outside auditor and I'm looking at let's say your log retention, and I see that you're keeping logs for 2 years, I need to have something to say, is that the right amount? I need to have a logging policy that says, as an organization, how long do we keep logs? As an organization, how strong should passwords be? If you don't have that, then nobody inside your organization knows the goal that we're all moving towards. So that's amazing. The last thing is that AI can help. Previously, people were forced to either write these policy documents from scratch or to go out and spend a lot of money on templates. And now I can go into Copilot or GPT and I can say, hey, provide me the template for an access control policy that will satisfy HIPAA and PCI DSS. Press the return button and it'll be there. And it gives you a great starting point. And I found that this is an area that AI really does provide some solid templates. So
Yeah, I can vouch for that. We've done a lot of that internally using
absolutely
AI tools. Yeah.
I want to say it is not cheating. It is just leveraging technology. It's something that we should all be doing to make our businesses more efficient.
Yeah, Sean, thoughts?
Yeah, I over the last, I don't know, couple of years, I've been writing more policies than ever, and bringing in AI really helped. And it gives you that rough draft, right, where you start from there. It's very helpful. You know, I would suggest if you're going to use it, write your AI policy and proper use of AI first, and then push that out to your employees, just so you're not putting any data into something that might be trained on and, you know, or leaking data. But yeah, I think the big one I see is that generally policy is usually a heavy lift the first time through anything. Some companies, not as big a deal, but usually the policy the policies don't exist, or they do exist and the champion that made them has left the organization, so they're very old, they haven't been updated, or they're updated and they're somewhere, and the people that need to know what the policies are, they haven't acknowledged them and they don't know where they are. Only leadership knows where they are. And so those are kind of the pieces that an auditor looks for are the people that need to know this, do they know it? And can you show proof that they know it? And then also, can you show us that it updated or that it's being updated? So anytime I submit a policy to any auditor and it doesn't have somewhere on their revision control or a last updated date, it comes right back. And we have to say, when was it last updated? And they want to see, for most frameworks, they want to know that it's being looked at least annually. So every year you got to be looking at that and reviewing it. Absolutely.
And AI can help with that as well. We've started uploading our current policy suite and saying, hey, can you help us show continued improvement on this and suggest some ways that we can alter it to make it even better?
Yeah.
That's
so
smart.
maybe an area that most folks maybe don't consider too carefully is just physical security. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, Matt.
Oh yeah, physical security, that's in all the frameworks. And the reason is because even if I have the latest, greatest technology, firewalls, MDR, protecting my endpoints, it doesn't mean a whole lot if somebody can just smash one window on my business and grab a server and have all my data. So we need to have physical security controls that are commensurate with all these great IT controls that we're putting in place. So what we're talking about is really the same thing, making sure I have layered physical security, that my server room is way in the back after you have to go through multiple fobs, right? You'll also want to show the auditor that not everybody has access to my server room, even employees, only the IT admins who absolutely need it. So again, roles-based access and the rule of least privilege. Equipment siting and equipment location, that's important because when people are working or they step away from their desk, I don't want people outside the building to be able to see the data on their screen. And the last one is monitoring. Monitoring, you're going to want to have an alarm system. You're going to want to have cameras. Things like this are paramount, especially for those high security zones like your server room. And just to get back to logging, all of this should be logged. So when I badge into the server room, it needs to go someplace again where it's not able to be altered.
Yeah, I think it needs to be logged. There needs to be proof that the logs are reviewed, and then there needs to be proof that action is taken. And so those are kind of the three pieces that we're trying to show evidence for in an audit. More often than not, it seems like every couple months, I'll run into a scenario in which we end up helping another organization that already has an MSP similar to ours, or an MSSP in there, and they've told them that everything's taken care of, but they're really only looking at the digital footprint. And so they didn't think of, well, where is the, do they print out things? CMMC is a good one where they have certain types of data that are government protected, right? That controlled unclassified information that people print out. Maybe it's a plan, a blueprint or something. Well, where are those stored? Who has access to them? What are your logs like? Do you have something where you log in at the front desk? And then what happens to that? Because that, one step is you actually have it. The other piece is, what do you do with it? Are you storing it somewhere? Does it just go to the back of the clipboard when it fills up? So those are things that are really simple to fix, but it just takes a conversation to go through and kind of put in a policy that then is enforced through controls that have technology and people that help enforce them.
Yeah, all great points. So we've gone through a really kind of good summary of all the technical controls that a business would need in order to lay a really solid foundation for the compliance programs. We can start talking about what's some key takeaways. What should I take away from this kind of conversation today? What's important for a business owner, business leader to take back?
I would say compliance is a team sport, that you need help. It's hard for small and medium-sized enterprises to do this all on themselves. But when they get with experts like the ones at ITS and Sean, it's an achievable goal. When you have the right technology, when you have the right people supporting you, all of this stuff can be done and it can be accomplished quite quickly. We all need to be humble and just keep working towards constant improvement, both in our physical and our network security. This is really what technical compliance is all about. It's not about checking the boxes. It's about getting a mindset of continued improvement for your organization.
Sean, last takeaways from your perspective?
I think Matt summed it up nicely. Yeah, it's continued, sustained, incremental change. And that's what the framework can do. And even with some of the more strict frameworks out there, you're not going to meet it the first time through. That's okay. And we create a plan of action, milestones, and we start to project plan out how to get there. And if you're biting off a little bit each week, dependent upon what your deadlines are to get that specific compliance in place, you'll get there. But you have to start on it, and you have to just be sustained. It has to be a sustained effort.
Great points. So our job here is not to leave anybody in stress. Right now, there is a kind of one simple step that you can take to help start your compliance journey and help protect your organization. That's schedule a compliance consultation with us. To do so, you can scan that QR code. You can go ahead and look in the chat. We've got a direct link to there, or you can just send us an email at secure@its.asap. We'll go ahead and set up a 30-minute meeting with you to go ahead and ask you some questions and understand your current exposure. We can take that info and then circle back with an action plan for you to begin that compliance journey. There's no obligation, and this is actually a free offer for live attendees. So I guess I'll leave that up there for a minute. Let's go ahead and transition over. We have some questions that have come in. So I want to go ahead and transition over to that. So some QA questions. So Matt and Sean, what are some critical mistakes that you see orgs making when it comes to compliance?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake that I see is thinking, like we were talking about early on, is that this is something that I just need to get through once and then it's over and done with, and I never have to think of compliance again. I think that's the biggest mistake, because it leads to unrealistic expectations and it leads to a lot of disappointment when you realize that this is just a continual thing I'm going to have to think of for the rest of my business.
Cool. Another question came in. How long is this going to take?
Ooh, that really depends on where you're starting at. Yeah, I think that's why it's important to sit down and see where you're at. But if you're a small and medium-sized business, let's say 50, 75 employees, most of these frameworks can be implemented within 6 to 8 months. Do you think that's reasonable, Sean?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then if it's your second framework, I mean, it could be done almost within a couple of months, probably, just to get that small delta between ISO and SOC, or between CMMC and PCI DSS. So I'd say 6 to 8 months is definitely achievable.
Yeah. So one kind of follow-up. So someone begins this journey, and like you mentioned earlier that, hey, these are some things that you're going to kind of keep going, kind of year over year. Does it get easier over time? Like, is it less effort over time? Like, what's maybe you can kind of provide a little guidance there? What does that look
I would say from my own personal experience, it definitely gets easier over time. Once you build into your organization these policies, these procedures, the training, the kind of the just an understanding, a shared understanding amongst all of your employees about what compliance is and why it's important, it gets so much easier. It's all about building the culture.
I would just add that you, as long as you're behind it, the leadership is behind it, and everybody agrees that they need to get it done, you can't help but get better at it each time you do it. That's just human nature. I do think that if you work with an organization like ours or any kind of consultant that's been through it, they can at least share with you some of the things that you don't have to figure out on your own the first year through, right? One example of that I can give a tip here is when you're creating policies, you should write down all the commitments that you're making in those policies and then put them into a calendar. These things are done quarterly, these are done monthly, these are done annually. That's something that I've noticed people, the light bulb will go on at the end of our, when we're going, hey, we should write, and I go, oh, we've already got that. We did it while we were going through it. Here you go. Here's your compliance calendar. And so those are things that you might miss if you're doing it yourself, but there's a lot of information online that you can pull together depending upon if you're going to BYO or do it yourself, DIY, or if you're going to have someone help you.
I couldn't agree more. For ISO, they kind of demand you have a monitoring schedule, but regardless of what framework you're implementing, that will be your gold star. That will be the document you open up more than anything, because it tells me in June, I have to check these things. In July, we're going to do this, this, and this. And it helps you spread out the work over the calendar year and just achieve it in small chunks.
We have just to kind of go back to the critical mistakes. We took over an organization recently that they did it in-house, their SOC 2 type 1, and then come to do the SOC 2 type 2. It's now a big task because they didn't figure out all those things, right? And they had to hire someone from the outside. And really, they're very delayed on starting it, and we're now getting it going for them because it just became this huge daunting task again. We have another client, it's similar thing where they brought us in because of that, where I think they were in year 3, and it just became such a huge, like trying to get all your taxes together and your financials at the end of the year. And really, if you're doing it throughout the year, it shouldn't be that like that after you get through the first time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question came in. You mentioned Department of Defense, CMMC, and you it seemed like you were alluding that over time, like, is this going to be trickling down to small businesses at some point from like regulatory requirements and things like that?
Are they specifically talking about CMMC or just regulatory?
I think in general, I think that, we were just basically, hey, we started, I think Sean had mentioned CMMC and Department of Defense. Like, is it something like, it starts there and then over time, it's just going to be adopted down the chain, down the, down to the small business? So, like, do you see regulation coming? Like, what?
Yeah, I definitely see increased regulation coming from the government in the form, especially if CMMC is successful when it rolls out. They're going to look to see how they can bolster the cybersecurity of other industries in a similar fashion.
I could add to that. Lucky for those that are on this call and out in other industries, government moves very slow. So it will come, but it will be probably pretty slow. Those other departments will look to the Department of Defense and then implement that. And if you're not doing work with different government departments, then it won't affect you quite yet. I can tell you though, one of the other, to go back to the critical mistakes, is kind of to what Matt was saying, is if you go through it without the eye that it's a continuous process. I've seen people do it themselves and just run through it very quick and do like a SOC 2 type 1, which is a point in time audit, with the full knowledge that they're going to go into a type 2 in which they have to show that they're doing things over a period of time and they haven't fully implemented it. It's kind of like when you get that insurance attestation, the questionnaire that you have to do every year. And you go, we kind of do that one. And yeah, that one's pretty good. And sure, we do that. And so enough of that will equal everything being regulated. That's why the regulation's coming, because they asked those contractors that work to the Department of Defense, are you doing these things? And they said, yes, we are. And then they continue to get attacked by different nation states that know that that's the soft underbelly. Don't attack the Department of Defense, attack a vendor that worked for the Department of Defense. So I do see regulation coming if we don't all try harder. And if you want to get ahead of it in your industry, I think, there's market increases like we discussed where you can take advantage of that.
For sure. And we like to think about the federal government, but there's all these states that are going to try to legislate small businesses in their jurisdictions and make sure that the data they hold on their citizens is safe. So it's going to be kind of this sandwich approach.
Yeah, I'm in California, so we have the CCPA over here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Sure. All right, well, let's see, give it another 30 seconds, see if there's any other questions that folks are submitting.
Can
Yeah,
I add one thing
yeah,
while
go ahead.
that's happening? To go back to the how long will it take? The other one I hear often is how much will it cost, right? We can give you a definitive what the auditor will cost and what the consulting will cost, but there are sometimes things that need to change in your organization that will have cost to that. And that might be the structure of your digital footprint or even your physical footprint, right? If we have to put in different desks that lock to be able to put that CUI or that special data in, there's a cost to there that we didn't think of. You really need to set up the meeting and we can have the conversation, because you're asking kind of like the analogy I like to use is, you know, when will my house be move-in ready? Well, where did you start? Are we at the studs? Are we just pouring the concrete of the foundation right now? Or are we just remodeling a kitchen and then we're good to go? So we have to look at where your business is now and where it needs to be.
Absolutely. The other thing is that you can control cost. Some of these frameworks, they don't have to be on every single computer, every single asset that you have. You can scope them. And so if you keep the scope limited, you can keep the cost down and you can keep your work to a minimum as well.
That's a great point. They call that an
Sure.
enclave in the CMFC world. Sounds like a fancy way of just saying scope it, but yeah, that's everybody goes, how do I enclave? How do I make an enclave? Because they don't want to have to do it for everything, because it is onerous. There's a lot to it.
It is daunting.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're going to wrap it up here. I just want to thank Sean and Matt for their expertise and sharing this information with us. Feel free to reach out with any questions. Email us at secure@itsasap.com or scan that QR code. And happy to have that conversation with you. Thank you for your time. Have a great rest of your day, and we will catch up next time. Thanks, all.
Absolutely.
Thank you.